Hey guys, in this video I want to share some insights that I got during the work with my latest performance Dust, and I want to share some learnings with you. And yeah, if you have seen my performance Dust, it's around about 1 hour long. You possibly noticed that I used a lot of machines in this setup. And if you follow my Instagram or my YouTube channel, you know that I focused on the Digitakt in the past. So this setup was something completely new to me. And let me quickly first show you the setup itself, because some of you asked me about the MIDI routing and about the audio routing. So let's have a look, and then we go further into details. So talking about my setup, let's go through the machines first. So sure, I have a Digitakt here. In most of the tracks, I use Digitakt for creating textures or playing the drums or percussion sounds. This is mostly my drum machine and my texture machine. Also, the bass sounds are, in some tracks, they use the bass sounds on the Digitakt. Digitone is used for melodic parts. This is something new to my style of music, as some of you noted during the event. I also use it for creating grooves or bass lines or pads. Sometimes I like the pads of this machine. Roland is not used for this one. Octatrack, I will explain this in detail a little later. It's brain of my setup. I use it as a mixer and sequencing the peak, and I'm using it for playing the arrangements. Then I have the peak. The peak is my choice for creating pads and even it's a digital synthesizer. I love to create pads or analog sounding textures with that. Sometimes I use it for melody creation as well. Then I have the Typhoon. I don't know if you can see that here. Yeah, you can. The Typhoon is an addition I added not so long ago, maybe 1.5 months ago. So in the set, I use it for one track only. And for that track, the track is Ambivalence. You hear there are some interferences going on, which I liked a lot, and they are created by the Typhoon. I'm not really into it right now because I just had no time, but it's a really nice synthesizer, little one. Then I have, let's continue here first. I have a Turorial key step. I will tell you later for what I'm going to use it. Then I have two effect pedals from Strymon, the Night Sky and the Big Sky. I use only this one for my set, the Big Sky, and I use it only for one track actually. And at the end of this whole thing is my little mixer. I use it as a sub-mixer, which goes into the Octatrack, which leads me to the audio routing of this whole setup. And that is pretty easy. So Octatrack only has 2 audio ins. And I divided this whole setup in 2 parts because I wanted to add external effects to one part and keep the other part dry. And that is why the Digitone audio is routed into the Digitakt. And the Digitakt is routed to the input AB, I think, of the Octatrack. So Digitone, Digitakt go into the Octatrack. And then I have the peak and the Typhoon, which are routed to the mixer. And also my effect pedals are routed to the external send channel of the mixer. So these two elements, even the peak has a very excellent reverb algorithm. I can add these effects to these machines using the send channel of this mixer. And then the whole mixer output goes into the Octatrack, where I could mangle it again, which I don't do right now at the moment. So this is the audio routing, and the MIDI routing is also pretty straightforward. I'm using a daisy chain to connect everything, which works for me pretty well. So there's only a MIDI out on the Octatrack. Octatrack clocks all the other instruments. So Octatrack is the master. Because my tracks have a different speed, and the MIDI out goes into the Digitakt in, and the Digitakt through goes to the Arturia key step. And the Arturia key step through, I put this machine into the through mode. The output of the Arturia goes to the digitone. The digitone goes into, I think it goes to the Novation. The Novation out goes to the Typhon. The Typhon out goes into the Night Sky, and the Night Sky out goes to the Big Sky. So there are a couple of things I want to mention. The first is I put the key step pretty early into the chain because I'm modulating some elements of the mod wheel, and the digitone has a feature where you can modulate a couple of parameters at once using the mod wheel. But those commands are not going to the Digitakt through, and that is why I decided to put the Arturia first, and then the Arturia commands go straight to the digitone, so that I really can be sure that the mod wheel works with the digitone. Somebody told me Digitakt can also put the mod wheel commands through, but I haven't figured out yet. So this was the only solution for me. The other thing I want to note is that my pedals are MIDI enabled too. So I'm able to change the presets with the Octatrack. And I do that with one of the tracks. I can make sure that it's always the same preset going on. And normally what they should do as well is you could turn the knobs for adjusting the mix of the pedals. Which didn't work for me. So when it comes to MIDI, I'm not the big expert, but I was already happy to get these two guys enabled to work with MIDI. So this is my MIDI routing. So yeah, that is the setup. And I told you that Octatrack was the brain of this setup. And if you follow my channels, you know that I'm pretty new to this Octatrack world. And I'm still not sure about the role of this machine. So basically, I started working on the whole setup with the Octatrack on my mind as the main brain of everything. It turned out that it's not so easy than I actually thought. So Octatrack has a lot of features and a lot of functions. You know about these if you're into the Elektron world. But I wanted to use mainly 3 features of it for this set. And one is being my super expensive mixer, or my main mixer. I also use the Mix 8, as I explained earlier, but the Mix 8 output goes into the Octatrack. That works like a charm, no complaint about that. What I also wanted to do is, I was a little bored by my previous tracks written on Octatrack only. I published a lot of tracks using one pattern only, and only on Digitakt, and I wanted to go a little further by develop tracks using some variations in different patterns with different machines. So that is why I thought Octatrack Arranger would be the holy grail. No, holy grail. Oh my god, the holy, the holy end solution, whatever. Because it has a very good arranger. So I started working on the tracks, but very soon I realized that the Octatrack arranger is not made for every situation. My set is 9 tracks. Originally, I planned 10 tracks, and my plan was to program one arranger arrangement that I go through line by line. But it quickly turned out that Octatrack has a bug, or I don't know if this is a feature. I discussed it a couple of times with other guys, and they told me it's a normal behavior. I think this is not really cool. And the thing is, when you program your tracks with different speeds, and then you want to make some rehearsals, and you want to start at, let's say, line 100, so the whole arrangement is organized by lines in Octatrack Arranger, it starts MIDI, or it starts audio that comes from external gear and that is sequenced with the sequencer of the Octatrack. It starts to play that too late. So the machines are not really in sync. And it's something that I really couldn't figure out what is the problem with this. So at the end, I programmed the whole arrangement again, and I split it up in different parts that are easier to handle for rehearsals. So I had at the end, I had 2 separated tracks. That is, 10 Years Gone is a separate track, and Abendrot is a separated track. And then I have 3 arrangements consisting of 2 or 3 tracks. And this split down made it a little easier for me to exercise with this track. But still, this arranger is so tricky when it comes to turning MIDI tracks on and off. You really need to think about using parts for it, which I also didn't. I'm not so experienced with parts, because some of my tracks are using the same bank, but in one bank you cannot use 100 parts. If you're not familiar with the Octatrack concepts, maybe I do a separate video of that. But I think there are lots of videos out there. Anyways, some tracks are stored in the same bank. That made it nearly, well, not impossible, but it made it more complex to switch between different synthesizer presets on the peak, for instance. So there are lots of little things you need to think about when you're creating this arrangement that really annoyed me. And the third thing I used Octatrack was using it as a sequencer for my peak. And for that, it worked like a charm. So there's nothing I can complain about. That worked pretty well. So this was the Octatrack. I'm not sure if I'm going to use it again as my brain. Well, I have it now. But one thing that I really learned is, and that is what I want to talk about next, is keep it simple. So I have all of my machines here. I worked with Digitakt before only. And with the Digitakt, I'm really familiar. So I know what I do, and I can turn knobs, and I know what happens when I turn them. On the Octatrack, most of this is like a secret book for me. So I know how I can program MIDI patterns, but performing on the Octatrack or sampling on the Octatrack, which I don't use in this setup, is a closed book for me. It's too much that I don't know, which made me feel inconfident with this whole setup, because I didn't know exactly what to do. Another example how I made this whole thing more complicated than it actually was, I have the key step here. And the key step is mainly, I never pressed a key during the performance. Even the keyboard was cut off in the video. But I use it for mod wheel. So Arturia key step has a mod wheel strip here, and I use it for modulating a couple of parameters of the digitone at once. It's cool. It's really cool. But you have to think about what MIDI track do you receive on the digitone, and then you have another machine that you have to operate. Even you only use the mod strip or the mod wheel strip, you have to keep on your mind that one or two tracks using the mod strip, and all of these little things, they stack up. At the end, I got a setup that was so complicated that it was nearly impossible for me to operate it. Another thing is, or to play it live. Another thing is my pedals. I really love them. Like the Strymon Night Sky and the Big Sky, their reverbs are wow. I'm a big fan of reverbs. So I really wanted to incorporate these two guys in my setup. And there's one track that's called Ambivalence that uses the Big Sky cloud algorithm for creating a super rich cloud texture reverb. But I wasn't able to turn this on and off with the Octatrack. So yes, the pattern on the Octatrack switches the pattern of the Strymon, but I couldn't automate the mix of these two guys so that I could fade in this effect and fade it out at the end of the track. That means I had to bring in these effects by turning the aux send effect of my Mix 8 mixer. And that is another thing that comes on top that I have to think of, or that I have to thought of, to turn this on and off. So there are little things that made it complicated for me to perform these tracks, because each of the tracks is different. There are two tracks that I produced on Digitakt Digitone Peak. I recorded them and I made remixes for friends like Abendrot and 10 Years Gone. They are remixes. And I worked on these tracks in Ableton because it's official release and I want to deliver high quality, whatever. And then I added the additional elements. I added them back to my setup because I wanted to include these tracks in my DAW setup. And that is why some of the tracks are using Octatrack audio to play loops or one-shot samples on top. And all of this sums up, and I came to the point when I was really fed up because it was just too complicated. I started writing a book with pattern information. So because I went on holiday, I came back, and after 14 days without my machines and without the setup, I was really confused and I didn't know, or I forgot a lot of details that I have to think about. This book helped me a little bit because I wrote down which track was using what machine. It includes the speed of the track. Do I use external effects on this track and stuff like that. But I didn't write this book really continuously, so I stopped writing this for some tracks. And yeah, I will talk about this later in the video when I talk about my learnings of this whole thing. But you see, this setup is complicated. For me, it's complicated because I'm not really familiar with these machines. So yeah, I will talk about Keep It Simple in a minute, but maybe my next setup will be a little different. I bought another synth. I was at the Berlin Super booth. I came home and I really wanted to own the Typhoon from Dreadbox, which plays a pattern also in ambivalence. That came on top. I added new stuff to my setup. I was not consistent enough. That at the end of the day, when I wanted to produce this show, my plan was to record it in one piece, one take. I was just not able. I had a plan to perform this setup in front of some friends. For me, it's not possible. There are so many things that most likely will not be okay. I know I'm a big fan of making mistakes, and I think this whole doorless idea is about making mistakes and allow them, actually, not being perfect. But when you start with the wrong filter adjustment, the whole build-up of a track is destroyed. So I decided to record this whole show in the different takes. That made it a little easier for me to produce. Next thing I want to tell you is how I produced these tracks. I told you a couple of minutes before that some of the tracks are releases or remixes by some friends. And the workflow is I produced a sample pack actually for this setup. I'm gonna put this on my website in a couple of days. And so most of the tracks, they use some loops of this sample pack. So a lot of tracks use loops, which I normally don't like on Digitakt. I like to work with one-shot samples. But I use a lot of loops. And I sometimes I started with the groove, and sometimes I started with the ambient sound or whatever. But mostly I started with Digitakt Digitone, and then I created a pattern that I was really fun with and I really liked to jam. This was the first part, so I splitted this whole production in a couple of parts. The first part was the pattern production. I produced these patterns a lot during my Wednesday live sessions, and there were people in the chat that helped me, and they made together with me some decisions, and I thought that was a really cool way to work on my music, to get some external inputs, which I really appreciate. When you work alone with these machines, you have your headphones and you normally don't realize what's going on around you. And during these live sessions, there was a very good opportunity not to being forced to work on it once a week, but also to get inputs from the community, which I thought was really good, was really, really cool. So first part was creating the patterns. The second part first part actually was creating or collecting samples for it. Second part was creating the patterns. And the third part was creating the arrangements and decide how I want to arrange these tracks. And the workflow for this part is actually, for some of the tracks, I performed them because I wanted to remix a track. You can also see this in the track breakdowns during these live sessions. I will link these in the description below. There are, for all of the tracks or for most of the tracks, there are live sessions available where you can see how I did this track. So I'm not going to talk about these in detail. But some of the tracks I played and then I recorded parts of it or parts of the performance in Ableton and produced the single with it. And when the single was ready or finished, I pushed some of those elements back into loops that I imported on the Octatrack, and I played them on the Octatrack. So basically this workflow is pretty easy. And I think most of this workflow you can really feel when you see those videos that I linked down below. So yeah, my learnings of this whole thing is, yeah, I have to tell you, at the end of this whole process, I was kind of fed up. I worked on this whole set until I came back from my summer holiday break or from my summer break. that is like 3 months. And I think it's not really a long time, but working on music for so long it feels to me like I need to do something else, but I can't. Because Digitakt storage is more or less taken by the whole library I put on. So that is something, yeah, my learning. I wanted to talk about my learnings. Learning number one, super important, keep it simple. My next set will not incorporate all of these machines. I learned that I should really stay with maximum 2 machines at once. So I made a set with a Digitakt last year that was called Doorless. It was my first one. And that went really quick. I created the patterns in 2 weeks, and then I just exercised a little bit, recorded the whole thing for a radio station, and it turned out to be really cool. And the feeling of this set was kind of raw because it was not really overproduced or whatever. But I kind of liked it. Now it got so complicated that I sometimes was too lazy to turn on the machines and to exercise. So this is one thing I learned. Really keep it simple and focus on 1 or 2 things. The next learning is you really have to know what you're doing. So with the Digitakt, I'm super familiar with. With Digitone, a little bit. Digitone is like a surprise machine. You never know what comes out because of FM synthesis, whatever. But Digitone is okay-ish for me. The other machines I really have to work on these. And this is something where I come back to point number 1, keep it simple. Because during this whole process, I learned to play these machines, which is actually good. But it was not good enough for performing this whole setup at the end. And that is why I think I really will focus on 2 machines, maybe 1 machine only for my next setup. This might be a machine completely out of my world. I have something on my mind. Yeah, really, I can really encourage you to focus on one thing and do it until you can operate this machine during your sleep, really. The next thing I want to mention is that, I don't know, maybe you know my Digitakt course that I offer on my website. I tell students to develop a structure for the set and keep this set structure for each new song they do. Because it's super simple when each of your tracks has a kick on track number 1, it has a kick on a bass on track number 5, and texture effects on track number 8, whatever. That makes it easy to perform. What I did, I left my own structure, and because I wanted to create music that was different. I wanted to create a track, let's say, without a kick. So I put a different sound on track number 1. But then it turned out I still want the kick, and I put it on a different track. So a lot of tracks in this set, they use a different structure, which makes it really hard to remember when you're performing. When you're performing, you really think about how to build up the next climax, or what you do next, what is the next track, what should I think about, what knobs can I turn. But without this structure, I got really lost, and this is something I learned. Keep this structure for all of your tracks, or you have a really good reason not to do that. So you can really rely on this system, and that takes away a lot of stress. Another thing is that I learned is you really have to exercise a 1-hour set really good. I exercised a lot. So I talked about the sessions I had where I played a little bit around with my setup, but it was not enough. You really have to go through the whole set a couple of times, which is super time consuming. And you really have to focus on that. It happened to me a couple of times when I went through some of the split or some of the parts of the arrangements. I was talking about that earlier. I wanted to exercise, but then I noted, oh, there's something I could do better. And then I started tweaking knobs, and then I left my focus on the exercising and the rehearsal, and then I started working on the pattern again. So it is really crucial for my workflow to split the whole process of developing a set into different parts and really focus on this part. If you say, or if I say in the future, I don't want to tell you what to do, but this is my learning. If the pattern creation phase is done, it's done. I'm not going to add more elements, or I'm not going to change samples at a later stage. It's a really important learning that you really focus on what you're doing. Otherwise, you will be lost. And that is what happened to me. Because I started working on the pattern, I had not so much time to exercise. And when you don't exercise, you really have to being able to play all those tracks without thinking. When you start thinking, you are lost. When I start thinking about, oh, I forgot something to turn on. Sometimes I just forget to turn a track on or off. If I start thinking, I got lost. And I think that is the reason why my performances on Digitakt only are very intuitive and they focus on feelings, because I know what I do. So I can translate what I feel or what I want to do. I can translate that much better into movements on the machine. And that is what you really have to focus on while you're exercising. That was a really important thing that I learned. And the last point I want to notice, to make notes or to write a book or sheets about your tracks. For me, it is impossible to recall this setup in 1 year, for instance. Let's say this setup is a huge success and there are 20,000 streams on YouTube, whatever. Let's dream a little bit. And there is somebody who says in 6 months, okay, Matthias, I saw this. Can you come and play it for me? I will not be able to do that because it's too complicated. The first point is to bring this whole setup to somewhere else is really, for me as a single person. If you have a band track or whatever, no problem. For me as a single person, no chance. It's too complicated to bring all of this. I don't have the possibility or the possibilities to do that. But also, the organization of this setup makes it impossible because I have no notes. So if I go on now and I make a new music, and at a certain point I have to make backups of my Digitakt projects so I can import them at a later point, which you can't do on the Digitone, which you can't do on the other machines. You have to keep track of all of this somewhere, and which is why I don't know how you guys do that. Maybe you can leave some comments in below the video. I would be super happy to know how you do it. For me, I will make a book in the future. I already bought a notebook where I write down per track one sheet with the speed of this track, with the file, where did I store a backup of this file, what machines is it using, what channel do I use, what MIDI channels is it using, how is the samples are organized, whatever. All of these will be written in a book. I was already considering to develop a track sheet to put these in. So it's the same sheet for all of the tracks, so you know what's going on. Also important for this brain, which I don't know if I'm going to use it at the brain in the future. But that is something that I really want to do in the future. So yeah, these were these were the learnings of my whole process with this set. If you have any question or if there is a comment, I can tell you this stand, because when I post a video where people see the stand, they always ask me for that. It's from Jasper's. I will put a link in the description. I made a little review of this on my blog. If you have any questions regarding the setup, or if you have a question regarding the set, leave them in the comments below. I would be super happy to know how you solve your problems, how you make your setup, how you create it, how you're going to prepare. Yeah, that would be super helpful to share knowledge with each other. See you very soon, maybe Wednesday on my next live session. Take care.